Welcome everybody. Once again, it is what is this? Thursday, the 16th. Still no end in sight that we can count on. Anyway, it's kind of a nice day. It's not too bad. It's a little sunny right now. Hope you're all well, of course, and taking care of yourself, eating well, and sleeping well, and taking care of each other. Not getting on each other's nerves. Anyway. I want to just introduce the final rhetorical pattern that we'll be focusing on in this course. We've already done description, comparison, and argument. And of course, as I say all the time, none of these rhetorical patterns are mutually exclusive. So yes, mix and match, do two of them, three of them, all of them, anything you need to make your point. We're just sort of focusing on them at 4 times a semester. This last one has to do with definition. Now, I already sent you an email that has a bunch of terms on it, and you should have those terms in front of you. I'm going to sort of go over them and explain them all now. And they'll make a lot more sense when I do that. So you maybe want to take some notes. Again, these are the kind of things that I would have put up on the board and explained to you in class. And I think these words are helpful not because there's no quiz, but it's important because the terms can help make the assignment easier to do if you understand what you're asked to do. But don't forget, your essays can still be argumentative, or they can certainly use description, or they can use narration, and they can use comparison, whatever it is that you need. So by all means, utilize it as long as you are using definition in this final paper. By the way, this final paper, I'm not sure how it's going to work yet. I have to find out from the department whether or not we'll just do it the regular way, or whether there'll be a final day scheduled for us to be in which case, if that's the case, if we have to have that day, I'm not sure how that would work, so don't even worry about it. Then I'll give you a topic. So until I hear about this, start thinking of your own topic. So definition, as I said in the email, what something means. Now, there's no way I'm going to be asking you to write me some silly essay about, tell me what the definition of, a lamp is, or a pen, or, whatever. The idea of definition has to do with understanding concepts. And so this is important, okay, what it means to be, how we define important concepts for our, even right now, as I'm speaking, the president is defining his role as being the ultimate word on everything as a president, and that definition is being challenged by governors and senators all over the country. So even now, every day, the idea of definition is important to us. I don't want to make this take too long, but for instance, give you an example of what I mean. If I were to ask you what an A means, besides it being the first letter of the alphabet, you'd say A, the best you can get. It's A, it's the top of the, and if I were to ask you what an A grade means, everyone wants an A, right? You all want an A. You'd all say, well, it means the best. It means you get the highest you can get. You can't get any better than that. And you'd be right, but that really wouldn't be the definition of an A, all right? Because then we have to think about, well, how do we apply this? Does an A mean the same thing in your math class, in your science class, in your anatomy class, as it does in my class? Well, ultimately, yes. I mean, when it comes out on your GPA, it gets computed the same way, but the A is different for Professor Prinz's English class as opposed to another English class, and certainly math and science and the others. So how do you get an A from this guy? And suddenly the A becomes something slightly different. You need to come to class, participate in class, do all the papers, write good essays, thesis, body conclusion, proofread, the whole thing, which is a different collection of requirements that the math class or the science class take. So the definition of A in some ways changes the way we use it. And this is true of lots of things. Certainly, other examples I generally use in the classroom, for instance, would be the definition of sexual harassment. All of you who are working, all of you who are obviously in this university, are subject to the rules and regulations of sexual harassment guidelines. So, what does it mean? And frankly, that's always a lively discussion in the classroom too. What exactly does it mean? Well, we can give good examples of it, but how do you define it? 9 times out of 10, it's defined as unwanted sexual advances, something along those lines. Which is, okay, we all nod our heads and say, sure, that sounds fine. But the fact is, we all know what unwanted is. But then again, that even becomes, how do you know it's unwanted? When do you know that something's unwanted? And that becomes problematic, right? Sexual, I'm just going to leave that to you. Advances, what does an advancement mean? Well, it generally means to move forward, to advance. So when you think about it in terms of unwanted sexual advances, it means that if somebody's coming at you in some sort of sexual way, which is really not exactly what we understand that to mean. So it becomes, again, a problematic definition. There are lots of things where definition becomes important. So let me look at those terms with you. Get that piece of paper in front of you, or the email, or wherever you're looking at it, and think about why we bother to define. Or think of the last time you had to give somebody a definition of something. Usually it's to identify something. What is that? Well, let me explain what this is, and part of that explanation would be to define it. Not just give it a name, but actually define it. Which also includes to explain. Explanation. I'll tell you all about this. I will tell you how this works and why we're using it. I'll explain this whole thing like I'm doing now about this rhetorical pattern called definition. I'm sort of explaining it. I'm also, another word on there, instruct. I'm also hoping to gradually instruct you on how to use it, to tell you what you need to do to make this work. So, identifying, explaining, even instructing as to a procedure, if you will. Sometimes it's done for entertainment. You see this in movies and stand-up comedy, and just to help things, to move things along. Persuasion is good. Sometimes you're in the middle of an argument or a discussion or opposition, and you say, "Well, no, this is not. This is the way the word is used. Understand this, and then maybe we can have a better discussion." You can sometimes even win or even lose an argument if you are using a term incorrectly. So you want to make sure you know what those things are. And this is important. So when you say, for instance, if you're going to if I were to tell you to write a paper about love, which I would never do, by the way, the first thing you have to decide is, well, what love is he talking about? Is it familial love, family love? Is it romance and sexual love? Is it I just love that car? What kind of love are we talking about? And then you can decide how to proceed. You can't just talk about it in the abstract, hoping to include all of those things. So definition needs to be utilized a lot of times. Same thing with education or any other of those abstract terms. Most important in that list, though, is is to establish a standard. Again, sexual harassment, establishing a standard. A as opposed to B and C and D and F. These are standards. What's the difference between an A and a B? Good question. I mean, I know what it is for my class. I'm not sure what it means in history class or anatomy. So you need to find that. It's actually worth asking your professors. A very obvious thing might be to think about the motion picture ratings. G, PG, R, NC-17, X, whatever. how do we decide those things? You know, what's the difference between a PG and a G? Well, you'll say things like, well, language, sex, violence. Okay, fair enough, but then you have to define those things. When you say language, what language exactly are you talking about? Is every word that's considered profane, like, you know, damn, is that the same thing as all the other big ones? Sex, does it mean you can't see any part of the body, or just some parts, or how long can you watch? There's all kinds of definitions, and there's people whose jobs it is to know this. So again, definition becomes part of our everyday life. And so even now, living with this pandemic, you know, what is it actually, what's a pandemic? What does it mean? What does it mean to us? Social distancing needs to be defined, and it keeps, you know, suddenly changing, longer, shorter. We need these things defined clearly so we can proceed. When you are putting together a definition paper, you might want to consider those 3 words on the bottom of that sheet that I gave you, the email. There are 3 kinds of definitions. One is the lexical. That is the one you look up in the dictionary. Just look it up. Easy peasy, as they say. Limited, not always the most helpful, but it's a good start. And the second one is what we're interested in, the extended one, which means, obviously, the word extended, it's going to be longer. And usually in an extended essay that deals with definition, you would probably use some of the words that came before this, that whole list of strategies. Some, all, 1 or 2 of these would necessarily be part of this paper. So it seems to me that any definition requires, in this case, some kind of an example. I don't know how I can't imagine how you can write a decent definition of anything without some sort of an example. I suppose it could be done, but again, it seems like a reasonable thing to assume to have in it. And looking at the qualities or the characteristics of something or someone or some place or some idea. Characteristics sometimes refers to the physical attributes. Qualities sometimes refer to the more abstract things. It's quiet, it's calm, it's nice, it's not nice, it's scary, or characteristics being, you know, large or small, or color, things like that. You can mix it up. But even those words need to be specified. Drawing analogies, well, it's like this. If you tried to define a particular musical genre, for instance, you might say, well, it's very much like jazz, but it has a rock and roll edge to it. Suddenly we're comparing and we're using analogies to make this make sense. Defining negatively, a very popular one. It's not this. You might, again, going back to music. Well, it's not rock. It's not jazz. It's not reggae. It's something like, you know. And suddenly we're using defining negatively and analogies at the same time. So we do this with describing things that are relatively difficult to do. Try describing how something tastes, for instance. Well, it's not sweet, but it's got, you know, off you go suddenly. Negatively, right? It's not this process of elimination. And the same thing with functions. Functions is how something works. So if, for instance, you pick something, if somebody I had a question about the computer, and, you know, what exactly is, you know, what does ROM mean, or whatever. You might just don't try to explain it to me in techie terms. You might just want to say, well, this is what it does. You know, this makes it brighter. This makes it louder. Fine, I'm good to go. So sometimes knowing what something does in a machine, or in even somebody's title. You know, what's a prime minister? Well, this is what he does or she does. So all of these things need to be considered in a paper that deals with definition, although you don't necessarily have to use all of them. You can use one or two or more, but whatever you need. So that's it. I mean, those are all the terms, the purposes, the strategies, and the three kinds of definition. So I thought we would start this, and I haven't put it up there yet. I'm going to do it now, but in the next day or two, and I know because we're a little bit early on this, we're just getting our papers back. So, but today or tomorrow, I'm going to put up on the discussion board a question that asks you to define the word flirt or flirting. And here's what you should understand about this. All right. Obviously, a lot of you can go right to the dictionary and look up the word flirt in the lexical definition, and it'll say something like acting with amorous intent, meaning lovey, lovish intent. That's not going to do it. So here's what I want you to think about. Imagine you're defining this word for someone from another planet who has never heard the word before, has no idea what it means. And after they read your definition, they will have some idea of what it means, what maybe, how they would want to do it if they wanted to do it, or recognize it if they experienced it. So that's your audience. It's not, oftentimes when we get these definitions, and if you look at each other's definitions, by the way, you can tap into everybody else's responses on the board there, so you should do that here. As a matter of fact, I would require you to read everybody's definition, and I'd like you to give some responses to the definitions, because I think you'll see that the definition of these words are, this word anyway, changes from person to person, culture to culture, gender to gender. It's very interesting to see how specific and how broad, and sometimes how apparently inconclusive or incomplete the definitions are. So we'll have to see, and you'll see most of us won't do a good job of this. We might. We'll see what happens. But I'd like you to comment on each other, so some of them anyway, and see what people think. So that's what's going to look at the discussion board tomorrow or the next day, and we'll get some responses up to see what kind of a challenge it is to define something. In this case, a very simple term. Ironically, even as I say to you, you all know what it means. We could have a conversation, but we all, I guarantee you'll see, will have distinctively different definitions of the term. So there you go. Take care of that right away. Keep looking for the discussion board, and when you see the word flirt up there, you'll know what to do. Put a little paragraph in there of your own, and we'll get back to you. Okay, everybody? There'll be another one of these. We'll get a couple more videos. I'm going to put up some articles to look at, and there are 2 articles in your textbook. One is called I Want a Wife, and one is called Pride. So please read those, and we'll talk about those probably by the end of the week and certainly next week. All right, and start thinking about what you might want to do for your next paper. That's it. I'm going to go post this, and that's it. Peace, everybody. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Wash those hands.